Jimmy Fallon was in the middle of a heartwarming segment about family traditions when a frail voice from the audience stopped him cold. "I have 6 grandchildren," said the elderly woman in the 4th row, her voice carrying a sadness that seemed to fill the entire studio. "But none of them remember I exist." The words hit the festive atmosphere like a stone thrown through glass. Jimmy's smile faded instantly as he searched the audience for the source of that devastating confession. In seat 4D sat Grace Morrison, 85 years old, wearing a lavender cardigan that had seen better days and clutching a small purse in her lap. It was December 20th, just days before Christmas, and The Tonight Show was taping their annual holiday special. The studio was decorated with twinkling lights and garland. The audience was in high spirits, and Jimmy had been sharing funny stories about family gatherings gone wrong. But Grace had something far more serious on her mind. She sat perfectly upright. Despite her age, her silver hair styled in the same careful waves she'd worn for decades. Her eyes, though clouded slightly with the early stages of cataracts, still held a sharpness that spoke of a mind fighting against time. The hands that gripped her purse were spotted with age but steady. The hands of someone who had spent a lifetime caring for others. Jimmy had noticed Grace during the pre-show warm-up because she wasn't laughing. While 300 other audience members roared at his holiday jokes, Grace sat quietly with a small, polite smile that never reached her eyes. There was something about her stillness that had caught his attention, a loneliness that seemed to radiate from her small frame. "Ma'am," Jimmy said, setting down his note cards and stepping closer to the audience. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" His voice was gentle, concerned, the tone of someone who sensed they were about to hear something important. Grace rose slowly to her feet, her movements careful and deliberate. When she spoke again, her voice carried the clarity of someone who had taught Sunday school for 40 years and knew how to project to the back row. "I said I have 6 grandchildren, but they don't remember I exist." The studio fell into the kind of silence that feels heavy, oppressive. Jimmy's face went through a series of emotions as the implications of her words sank in. Here was an elderly woman, alone at a holiday taping, carrying a burden too heavy for her small shoulders. "What's your name?" Jimmy asked, his host persona completely abandoned. Grace straightened her shoulders with pride. "Grace Morrison. I'm 85 years old, and I raised 3 children who gave me 6 beautiful grandchildren." The past tense didn't escape Jimmy's notice. "You raised them?" he asked gently. Grace nodded, her composure beginning to crack slightly around the edges. "My husband died when the children were young," Grace explained, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "I worked 2 jobs and raised them alone. David, Susan, and Michael." The way she said their names carried decades of love and sacrifice. Jimmy moved closer to the audience, drawn by something in Grace's voice that transcended entertainment. "And your grandchildren?" he prompted softly. Grace's smile returned, but it was tinged with sadness. "Sarah is 22, studying medicine. Tommy just turned 19. He's in college. The twins, Emma and Ethan, are 16. Little Lucy is 12, and baby James just turned 8. She recited their names and ages like a prayer, each one precious and perfectly remembered. The audience was captivated now, sensing they were witnessing something profound. Jimmy felt his chest tighten as he began to understand the scope of Grace's loneliness. "When did you last see them?" he asked, though part of him didn't want to hear the answer. "Thanksgiving," Grace said simply. 2 years ago, the words fell like stones in the silent studio. Behind the scenes, the control room had gone quiet. Producers who usually barked directions into headsets stood transfixed by the raw honesty unfolding before them. The cameras stayed focused on Grace, capturing every nuance of her dignified pain. Jimmy stepped off the stage completely now, walking directly toward Grace's row. 2 years, he repeated, unable to hide his shock. Grace nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her purse tighter. "They're all very busy," she said, the words clearly rehearsed, a script she'd written to protect herself from the truth. Sarah has medical school. Tommy has his studies. The twins have activities. Her voice grew smaller with each excuse. And your children? Jimmy asked as he reached her row. Grace's composure finally began to fracture. They call sometimes, usually when they need something. The brutal honesty of the statement hit everyone in the studio like a physical blow. This wasn't just loneliness. This was abandonment disguised as busy schedules and good intentions. Jimmy felt anger rising in his chest, anger at a family that had forgotten the woman who sacrificed everything for them. Mrs. Morrison, Jimmy said, his voice thick with emotion. May I ask you something? Grace nodded, trusting the stranger with her pain in a way she couldn't trust her own family. What brings you here tonight? Grace's answer was so honest, it took everyone's breath away. I wanted to be around people who were happy. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be part of something joyful. She paused, gathering strength for what came next. And I wanted to tell someone, she continued, her voice growing stronger, before I forget how. The room went cold as the implication hit everyone simultaneously. Grace had Alzheimer's. Jimmy's knees nearly buckled. Mrs. Morrison, he whispered. Are you? She nodded before he could finish the question. Early stages. Some days are better than others. But the doctor says I should prepare myself. The studio audience was openly crying now, but Grace wasn't finished with her story. I'm forgetting little things first. Where I put my keys, what I had for breakfast, but I'm terrified of forgetting them. She opened her purse with shaking hands and pulled out a small photo album, worn smooth from handling. I look at these pictures every day, trying to memorize their faces. Sarah's laugh, Tommy's smile, the way the twins finish each other's sentences. But they don't know, Grace continued, tears finally spilling down her weathered cheeks. They don't know I'm disappearing. And by the time they realize what they've lost, I won't remember enough to tell them how much I loved them. Jimmy made a decision that would define this moment forever. Without consulting producers or considering television protocols, he sat down in the empty seat next to Grace and took her hand in his. Mrs. Morrison, he said, his voice breaking, they know, do they? Grace asked. The question of someone who had been ignored too long. Jimmy squeezed her hand gently. Tell me about them. Tell me everything. Help me understand how someone could forget a woman like you. For the next 10 minutes, Grace told Jimmy about her grandchildren. Sarah, who used to braid Grace's hair when she visited. Tommy, who called her his best buddy until he turned 16. The twins, who spent every summer at her house until they got too cool for Grandma. She spoke about Lucy, who used to draw pictures for her refrigerator. And baby James, who would fall asleep in her lap while she read to him. With each memory, Grace came alive again, transforming from forgotten woman to beloved grandmother. They used to fight over who got to sleep in my room when they visited, Grace said, her eyes bright with memory. I had this old rocking chair that played lullabies, and they all wanted to be rocked to sleep in it. Jimmy listened to every word, understanding that he was receiving something precious, the final testimony of a woman's love for her family. They sound like amazing kids, he said softly. You must be so proud. I am, Grace replied. But I'm also scared that when I'm gone, they'll realize they wasted all this time. They'll remember that Grandma was always there, always loving them, and they'll wish they had loved her back while they still could. The weight of her words settled over the studio like snow. Jimmy looked around at the audience, at the cameras, at the crew members who had stopped working to listen. Then he made another decision that broke every rule of television. Mrs. Morrison, he said, standing up and offering her his arm, would you do me the honor of joining me on stage? Grace looked confused. Oh, I couldn't. I'm just an old woman with nothing important to say. Ma'am, Jimmy replied, his voice carrying absolute conviction. You're not just anything. You're a grandmother who raised 3 children alone, loved 6 grandchildren unconditionally, and still has enough love in your heart to worry about them instead of yourself. He helped Grace to her feet and began walking her toward the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced to the studio, I want you to meet the strongest woman in this room. The audience rose to their feet as one, applauding not for entertainment but for recognition. Grace walked slowly but proudly toward the stage, Jimmy's arms supporting her every step. When they reached the stage, Jimmy didn't take her to the guest chair. Instead, he led her to his own desk, the sacred space of late-night television hosts. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, "this is your moment. This is your stage. Tell your grandchildren what you want them to know." Grace looked out at the cameras, understanding that millions of people would hear her words. "Sarah, Tommy, Emma, Ethan, Lucy, and James," she said, her voice clear and strong. "If you're watching this, I want you to know something." She paused, collecting herself for what might be her last chance to reach them. "I love you more than all the stars in the sky," Grace continued, using the phrase she'd whispered to them as babies. "I love you when you visit and when you don't. I love you when you remember my birthday and when you forget." The studio was completely silent, hanging on every word. "But most of all," Grace said, her voice growing stronger, "I love the people you've become. You're kind, intelligent, beautiful human beings, and I'm proud to be your grandma." Jimmy wiped his eyes openly, no longer concerned about his television image. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, "is there anything else you want them to know?" Grace thought for a moment, then smiled, the most radiant smile anyone in the studio had ever seen. "I want them to know that love doesn't have an expiration date. Even when Grandma forgets your names, even when I don't recognize your faces, even when I'm gone, my love for you will still be there." She looked directly into the camera. "It will be in every sunset you watch, every cookie you bake, every story you tell your own children. Because love like mine doesn't disappear, it just finds new ways to show up." Jimmy made one final gesture that no one saw coming. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, "I want you to call them, right now, all of them." Grace shook her head gently. "Oh, they're busy. They don't have time for their old grandma." Jimmy took her hands in his, looking directly into her eyes. "Mrs. Morrison, after what you just shared, they'll make time." The first call went to Sarah, the medical student. When she answered, Jimmy took the phone. "Sarah? This is Jimmy Fallon. I'm here with your grandmother, and she has something to tell you." What followed wasn't television. It was family reunion broadcast to millions. Sarah's voice cracked as she heard her grandmother's voice full of love and longing. "Grandma, is that really you?" One by one, they called each grandchild. Tommy dropped everything to talk to his best buddy. The twins cried together on speakerphone. Lucy screamed with joy. Baby James asked when he could visit again. Each conversation was the same: shock, tears, apologies, and promises to visit soon. Grace glowed brighter with each call, transforming from forgotten woman to beloved matriarch before everyone's eyes. The final call was to her son David. "Mom?" His voice was filled with confusion and concern. "Are you okay? Someone said you're on the Tonight Show." Grace smiled through her tears. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she said. "I just wanted everyone to remember that I'm still here, still loving you all, still your mama." David's voice broke as he promised to drive down that weekend with the whole family. When the calls ended, Grace sat quietly for a moment, processing what had just happened. "They remembered me," she whispered, as if she couldn't quite believe it. Jimmy nodded, smiling through his tears. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, "how could anyone forget you?" Grace laughed, the sound of pure joy filling the studio. It was the laugh of someone who had been invisible and was suddenly beautifully seen. The show ended with Grace, still sitting at Jimmy's desk, surrounded by flowers that audience members had brought forward. The image became legendary, an elderly woman reclaiming her place at the center of her family's universe. After the cameras stopped rolling, Grace was surrounded by love from unexpected places. Audience members shared their own stories of elderly relatives they'd neglected. Crew members called their grandparents. The entire studio became a celebration of family connections renewed. Jimmy personally drove Grace home that night, not to her small apartment, but to Sarah's medical school dorm, where an impromptu family reunion was already in progress. Grace's children had driven through the night to be there, their own children following close behind. The episode aired on Christmas Eve, becoming the most watched Tonight Show in the program's history. But more importantly, it sparked a nationwide conversation about elder loneliness and the responsibility we have to the people who raised us. Within a week, Grace had received over 100,000 letters from viewers sharing their own family stories. Nursing homes reported record numbers of visits. Grandparents everywhere found their phones ringing with calls from grandchildren who suddenly remembered how much they missed their voices. Grace Morrison became a symbol of the love that persists even when it's forgotten, the strength that endures even when it's unseen. Her appearance reminded millions of viewers that the people who love us most are often the ones we take for granted. 3 months later, Grace passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by every member of her family. Her last words were about the night she reminded the world what love looks like when it refuses to give up. At her funeral, Sarah read from the letters Grace had received from viewers around the world. Tommy spoke about the grandmother who taught him that love means showing up. The twins shared memories of summers at Grandma's house, but it was 8-year-old James who captured the essence of Grace Morrison's legacy. "Grandma taught us that love doesn't forget," he said, his small voice carrying the wisdom of someone far older. Even when people do. Jimmy Fallon attended the funeral, not as a celebrity but as someone whose life had been changed by Grace's courage. He learned something profound that December night, that the most important stories aren't always the ones we plan to tell. Sometimes they're the ones that find us when someone is brave enough to stand up and remind us what really matters. Grace's small photo album was passed down to Sarah, who now looks at those pictures every day, memorizing faces she once took for granted. The rocking chair that played lullabies sits in Lucy's room now, waiting for the next generation of grandchildren, who will learn what unconditional love sounds like. And somewhere in the Tonight Show archives, preserved forever, is the moment when an 85-year-old grandmother reminded the world that family isn't just about blood relations or holiday obligations. It's about showing up, staying connected, and remembering that love is the only thing that really lasts long after everything else fades away.